Hello and welcome to our fourth reflection as we journey together with the Gospels. Today's theme is losing and finding. We often talk of life as a journey with its ups and downs and twists and turns. And all the experiences on our journey affect us and make us the people we are. But unless we reflect on our experiences, we may miss their meaning. Some people have lives which fall naturally into chapters. They move from place to place, undertake new jobs, change relationships, and experience significant events. Other lives seem to be one long chapter without any geographical movement or sudden change. And it's easy for the latter to say, nothing has ever happened to me. However, I would like to suggest to you that whatever our outward circumstances have been in life, there will always have been an underlying journey with its own directions and movement. All my reflections during Lent are looking at some of the strands which make up our inner journey. When we've been on a car journey, we've all missed something out of the window because we're looking somewhere else. Did you see that? Is a question which can be asked of us just as often about our inner journey. Some people shy away from self-knowledge, and certainly that knowledge can be painful, challenging, and uncomfortable. But it can also be affirming, encouraging, and fill us with a sense of wonder and hope. It is also an essential part of our growing into wholeness, for what we do not know can control us. But what we become aware of, we have the possibility of controlling. Part of the Christian discovery is that God is there with us, not only when we're successful, but also when we fail. Not only when we stride out confidently, but also when we're hesitant and confused. All the time, we are enfolded in love, though we may not always recognize this. So then, let's look at two journeys now, which are recorded in the Gospels. And I hope we shall catch some reflection of our outer and inner journeys in them. The first reading is a parable, the parable of the prodigal son. The father and his two sons working in their fields. The younger son is unhappy and planning to leave home. He demands his share of the family inheritance. And sad father hands over the younger son's inheritance. The son then leaves home. His father watches from the rooftop, upset to see his son leaving, and the son heads to a far-off country. And there he enters a city, and he soon attracts friends, eager to help him spend his money. And he spends his money on wild living and living the party lifestyle. A famine hits the area and his money runs out. And his new friends, well, they desert him. He leaves the city to look for work. The only job he can get is looking after pigs. It is one of the most unclean jobs a Jewish boy could imagine doing. And he's so hungry, he even longs to eat the pods the pigs are fed. He thinks of the food that the servants have at his father's home, regrets his foolish behaviour and wants to put things right with God and his father. And so he heads back home to beg his father to accept him as one of his servants. His father sees him coming and is full of love for his disobedient son, and he runs to greet his son and throws his arms around him and kisses him. And the son confesses he sinned against God and his father. He's no longer worthy to be called his son. His father tells the servants to bring his son the best robe, sandals and a ring for his finger. The fatted calf is killed and a celebration feast begins. Meanwhile, the older son returns from working in the field and asks one of the servants what the music and dancing is all about. On hearing his younger brother has returned, he's very angry. His father goes out to plead with him to join the celebrations, and the son complains how unfair it is that he's been working hard without any celebrations, but his brother, who has been squandering money, is treated to a feast. His father explains that everything he has belongs to the older son, but they must celebrate his lost son being found. And the forgiving father celebrates his lost son being found, leaving the older son deciding how he's going to react. Well, that parable could quite equally be called the parable of the two brothers or the waiting father. This isn't just a nice story with a happy ending told by Jesus. It is a description of his ministry. God loves like the father in the parable and welcomes the prodigals, those who are marginalized by society, back with joy. The story begins and finishes at home. St. Luke tells us that this can only be a homecoming because, first of all, this is a home. That it is only when we come home that we discover the value God bestows on us and the extent of the love of which we did not realize we were the recipients. I hope that you will be able to identify with each of the three characters in the story we heard. I guess these may not only come from the religious parts of our lives, but also from our experiences as members of families. It may be from your own experience of being a parent, of costly, vulnerable love and hurt maybe, and perhaps of letting go and many other things, which helps us realize what God is like. This is a lovely parable which reminds us that we may stop being interested in God, but he doesn't stop being interested in us. But the trouble is, we do not know this until we come home again. It reminds us too that the gospel is for all people, the older and younger brothers alike. Well, let's have our second reading now, another journey from St. Luke's Gospel. It's the story and the journey to Emmaus. Now the same day that the tomb of Jesus was found empty, two of Jesus' disciples were going to a village called Emmaus. It was a walk about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were discussing the recent events that had happened in Jerusalem. And as they walked, Jesus walked with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" Jesus asked. They stood still, their faces downcast, and one of them, called Cleopas, replied, Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know what has happened there in the last few days? What things? Jesus asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in all he said and did. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to save Israel. It is now the third day since all this took place. Then today, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it empty, just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. Jesus said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures about himself, the Messiah. As they approached Emmaus, Jesus continued on as if he was going further, but they insisted, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And when Jesus was at the table with them, he took bread and he gave thanks. He broke it and began to give it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized Jesus. And then he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning while he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And they got up, and they returned immediately to Jerusalem. They found the 11 disciples and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on their trip and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. This is a different journey experience to the last one. It seems to begin where the disciples had been abandoned as they walked home and feeling that God had left them. At least this was the starting point of the story. But by the end, they had discovered that this was not true. Do you remember the words of Footprints in the Sand, which echoes at the end of this lovely Christian poem that God was never absent, and that when there was only one set of footprints in the sand, that was when I carried you. St. Paul tells us again and again that nothing can separate us from the love of God. However, despite knowing this, in the middle of a difficult experience, it can seem that God has left us, and the question rings out, "God, where are you in all this?" As I said earlier, the Emmaus story begins seemingly with the absence of God and ends with the recognition of his presence. It is a story out of which faith and understanding grow, and God's purposes are better understood. It is an invitation to go on in times of difficulty rather than draw back and thereby find meaning in what seems meaningless. It reminds us that in times of darkness in our lives, we can forget all our previous experience of God's presence and love and get things out of perspective. It is not the whole story. The final invitation to Jesus, "Stay with us." That's a reminder of what they would have missed if they had not asked the stranger into their home. So then, we have looked at two journeys, both which ended in a celebration feast. In both, the outer journey reflected a long inner journey. Both are about losing and finding. Yet loss is not only a negative thing, for it may be a necessary prelude to self-knowledge, growth, a positive change, or the recognition of God's activity, his love. All this comes as we glimpse more and more of the God who is with us on the journey. Well, that brings us to an end of this week's fourth reflection. And I look forward to journeying with you again on our fifth and final reflection next week, as we then look forward to Holy Week and Easter. But until then, I wish you God's blessing.